Vayisa Aaron as Yodo el Ha'om Vayivarachem. There's a hidden gem in this week's parsha, which is not explicit, but it does say that Aaron, at this beautiful moment of Yom HaShmini, the Chanukah HaMizbeach, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Aaron didn't only do what he was told, which was to bring all the karbonos, the olah, the chatos, and the shlamim, but he did something that he wasn't told to do. Vayivorech osam. He gave a bracha to Klal Yisrael. We don't know what bracha he gave, but Chazal tell us, Rashi brings it down, the bracha he gave was, Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yer Hashem panav b'elecha v'choneka, Yisra Hashem panav b'elecha v'yosem v'choshalom, the famous Birkas Kohanim, those 15 words, which are not spelled out in this week's parsha at all. You have to wait for later on in the Torah to get the exact text of this bracha, but this is a bracha which is Ha'amura Mipi Aaron HaKohen, which was authored by Aaron HaKohen in this week's parsha at the moment of the inauguration of the Mishkan, and he's expressing the idea that, look, it's true that we are bringing karbonos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that our life is defined by Avodas Hashem, but that's only half the story. The other half of the story is that we are empowered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be carriers of a bracha to our family, a bracha to Klal Yisrael, and ultimately a bracha to mankind. Don't forget, when Avraham Avinu, at the beginning of Lech Lecha, has given his destiny, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, "V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachos v'adama." Your job ultimately in life is to be the carrier of a bracha to mankind, to all the families of the world. And that bracha is the history of the Jewish people that we've brought into this world. We've taught the world all sorts of truths and all sorts of values and ideas which bring them closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of monotheism and chesed and family life and all the different contributions that the Jewish people have given to mankind over the millennia. This is all part of the V'nivruchu v'chol kol mishpachos v'adama. But here at this point, Aaron HaKohen decides that he has to take the initiative. He's going to say words which no one has told him to say. And these are the words of bracha, and these words of bracha contain within it, they are a binyan av for all the different types of bracha in the world. Chazal explained to us, if you look here in the Sforno very beautifully, he says, Yivrech Hashem v'yishmerecha is a focus on Shemira, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect us from mistakes, from averos, from misdeeds. We need a special Shemira, and that corresponds to the chatos, the korban chatos. And then there is Yer Hashem panav b'elecha v'choneka, to be able to engage in mitzvahs and in ruchnius, which elevate us and give us a hisroimamus, and that corresponds to the olah. The olah was, as the name implies, an aliyah for us, to bring us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the word korban indicates, to be litkarev, to come closer to Hashem. And then there is v'yosem lecha shalom, the third pasuk of the Birkas Kohanim, which is the shlomim, which brings us shalom, which brings us peace ben Adam l'chaveiro, peace between the guf and the neshama, and ultimately peace between Klal Yisrael and the rest of mankind. So this bracha is massive, it's mega. It is chovei golomos, it embraces the whole of Jewish history, and this was the contribution of Aaron HaKohen, and this is one of the major contributions of Aaron in this week's parsha. The second major contribution of Aaron is something else completely. The second contribution is contained in the two words, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron was silent. And he was silent in the face of an overwhelming tragedy of the death of Nadav and Avihu, who made an error of judgment in the avodah of the Kohanim, and they were killed by the Eish min Hashamayim. So here we find on one and the same day, in one and the same event, Aaron is giving us the words of bracha, that he knows how to speak in a way which will bless and bring blessing down to all of us for all future generations, but he also knows when to be silent. And this is the pasuk in Koheles, Eis lachashos v'eis ledaber, there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. And he understood that at this point, when this unspeakable tragedy took place, was not a moment to say anything. It was beyond human contribution, beyond human comprehension. Couldn't understand why Nadav and Avihu had to die at this point, but he was makabel completely. He accepted upon himself a tziduk adin. Now, the truth is, Judaism and Torah mitzvahs, we don't have a Judaism of silence. Monks and nuns in monasteries live a life of silence. We don't. We use speech all the time. Dibur of tefillah and of Torah and of chesed and relationships, etc. Speech is of the utmost importance to know how to use the koach dibur, which is the hallmark of the human being, and all of creativity surrounds dibur. And yet, it still remains true that there are moments of transcendence. There are moments beyond dibur. And they can be beyond dibur either tragically, as in Vayidom Aaron, or they can be beyond dibur because we are overwhelmed by the positive nature of the ruchnius of that moment. So, for example, at Har Sinai, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Klal Yisrael was silent. A kala under the chuppah. When the Chassan says, Hared Mekudeshes Li, she is silent. She accepts the Kiddushin, accepts the marital bond silently, because there's nothing to add. She just needs to be there and accept it. It's a silence of acceptance. It's the acceptance which is a recognition that something is happening here which is overwhelmingly spiritual, sometimes negative and sometimes positive. In the life of Eliyahu Hanavi, he was waiting for a Dibur Hashem, and he experienced a storm and an earthquake and thunder and lightning, and the Dvar Hashem didn't come. And then there was a moment of kol demomo daka, a small sound of silence, and that was a kol Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in the silence, not in the thunder and lightning. And this is a very interesting facet of Torah life, which is not often spoken about, to know how to use silence productively. And that is the lesson of Aaron HaKohen, the double lesson of Parsha Shemini, to know when to give a bracha and to speak and to generate blessings for Klal Yisrael and for mankind, and sometimes to know how to be silent. Of course, the truth is, sometimes silence is criminal. Sometimes, when an injustice is taking place, then the halacha is, lo samor adam riyecha, you're not allowed to stand by silently and do nothing. Sadly, we've seen after October the 7th, many nations of this world and international organizations who saw and knew about these atrocities and didn't speak up, and didn't say anything, and didn't protest. So that's a type of silence which is criminal, which is complicit with the injustices and the atrocities that take place. That's a different type of silence. And sometimes silence is simply passivity. You're silent because you don't want to get involved. But this was a silence of emunah, of Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim by Yidom Aaron. And especially this week, that this Shabbos is sandwiched between Yom HaShoah HaGvura in the past week, commemorating the unspeakable atrocities and sufferings of the Holocaust, and next week we're having the Yom HaZikaron L'Chalalei Tzahal, those people who have lost their lives defending Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and Medinas Yisrael. This is a week where we're going to have to face tragedy, and there isn't much that we can say. We must bear in mind, Vayidom Aaron, bear in mind that the silence of acceptance is really the derech of the Torah, to accept the Devar Hashem, to accept the Tziduk Hadin, at the same time to know when to speak up and to give a bracha. So this double-edged, so to speak, message of Aaron HaKohen in this week's Parsha is extremely relevant. Just end with a sort of a tragic story that I heard once from a friend of mine, Nebuch, and his family. There was a tragedy that a teenage boy, a lovely boy, was killed, mugged in the street, and was killed, and the family were completely shaken up and sitting shiva, and they were really protesting, and they were crying and everything. And at a certain point, the grandfather arrived from Israel, and they welcomed him, and they were crying and speaking about how terrible it was. And they asked him to come and sit down. He said, "No, I'm not sitting down yet until I hear from you that you are makabel, that you're accepting." So they said, "What do you mean accepting?" So he rolled up his sleeve and he showed them the number on his arm from Auschwitz, and he said, "We have to be makabel. We have to accept that this was the Rotzon Hashem. We don't understand it, and we'll never understand it. But Vayidom Aaron is the art of being Makabel Malchus Shamayim." And this is the tremendous inner strength and the inner emotional discipline and the restraint that the Torah requires of us. And at the same time, we have to focus on being a bracha for each other, for our families, for Eretz Yisrael, and for the whole of mankind. And indeed, we should be zeicher to only be involved in these brachas, which Aaron HaKohen taught us for many generations to come. V'chein yirot.